this enchanted lullaby.
There is no truth until you decide what truth is. Each person should find that truth out for his or herself.
Greetings, Metacenter family. This is the first episode of Let Us Learn Together, which deals with government structure. This is brought to you by the Metacenter research team. Many of you may have noticed a few months ago in a newsletter, I said, hey, let us pretty much research together about pretty much any topic under the sun, but we want to start, in very easy to gather information topics and get more complex as time goes on. And so many of you did reach out, and this is the first episode. So I hope you enjoy. I hope you actually do learn something on today's episode. So here we go.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. Good morning. We are the Who's. Now, part of my portion was to research the legislative. So, the legislative branch is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate, which equal the Congress. So together, it is 535 members. Now, the House of Representatives have 435 elected members, and the Senate has 100 senators. Let's see what else here. There's a lot of great information. The House of Representatives has 6 non-voting members representing different districts or different parts of the North America, right? So you have the District of Columbia, Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, Americana Samoa, Guam, U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Commonwealth of Northern Mariana Islands. And there are some very interesting members that represent these states. Now, the members of the House of Representatives are elected based on population, right? So the members of the U.S. House of Representatives each represent a portion of their state, known as a congressional district. This averages about 700,000 people. And then we have the Senate. So the Senate has the sole power to confirm those of the president's appointments that require consent, and to provide advice and consent to ratify treaties. Now, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, serves as the president of the Senate. And then there's a president pro tempore, and Kamala Harris is placed if need be. And there are 2 senators from each state elected by the people. And this is the 117th Congress. So the majority party who runs the Senate, the majority party is the Democrats. They hold 48 seats. The minority party holds 50 seats, and they are the Republicans. Doesn't make sense, does it? Okay, other parties, there's the Independent. They have 2 seats. Both caucus with the Democrats. All right, so that is a basic summary of the legislative branch.
Okay. Was that it for the Who's, or is there more?
No, we have more. So
Okay.
My portion was the judicial branch. So bear with me, guys. I haven't presented in a long time, but
don't be scared.
So my portion was like the judicial branch. So I'll try to focus on like the Who's, try to answer all the questions with the Who's. It's pretty long, but I'll try to get through it. But the judicial branch is the branch that decides the constitutionality of the federal laws. and resolves other disputes about federal laws. However, judges depend on our government executive branch to enforce the court's decisions. So the highest court is the Supreme Court, which is in the United States. And who, like, how did this come about? Like, who decide this? Well, it was Article 3 of the U.S. Constitutions that was created the Supreme Courts, and they authorized Congress to pass laws establishing a system of the lower courts. Now, who created the authorized Congress to pass the laws establishing a system of lower courts is under Article 3 of the Constitution. And it created the Supreme Courts and authorized the Congress to pass the laws, which I had just said. So if you go like into Article 3 is in the Constitution is broken down into 3 sections. And the federal court system present form is 94 district levels of trial courts and 13 courts of appeals that sits below the Supreme Court. So the 13 courts below the Supreme Court, they're called the U.S. Courts of Appeals that sit below the U.S. Supreme Courts. And yeah, they called the U.S. Courts of Appeals. And a list of the appeal courts that has like authority in the United States is like the First Circuit in Boston. It's the second one in New York. The Third Circuit is in Philadelphia. The fourth is in Richmond. Fifth is in New Orleans. Sixth is in Cincinnati. The seventh is in Chicago. The eighth is in St. Louis. The ninth is in San Francisco. 10th is in Denver. The 11th is in Atlanta. And then you have the District of Columbia, which is in Washington. And then the Federal Circuit, that's in Washington. So those are like the 13 courts. There are 9 judges called just judges or called justices, I guess, who are nominated by the president, and it's confirmed by the Senate. So like, who are the members and the positions? Well, you have the Chief of Justice. That's the head. His name is John Roberts. And they can serve for life or until they retire. Now, who nominated him? That was President George Bush. And he took his seat in September of 2005 on the 29th. And then you have like the judges under him. So who? Clarence Thomas, he was nominated by President Bush, and he took his seat in 1991. You have Samuel. He was nominated by President Bush in 2006. And then there is Alina. President Obama nominated her in 2010. Then you have Neil M. Gorsuch. I'm sorry, I didn't pronounce the last names. But President Donald Trump nominated him in 2017. Then there's Brett M. K. I'm not even going to pronounce his last name. I can't. He was nominated by President Trump in 2018. Then there's Amy Coney. President Trump nominated her in 2020. And then I'm gonna botch his name. Ketanji Brown Jackson. Biden had appointed her for the District of Columbia in 2021. She took her seat in 2022. So the Supreme Court reviews less than 3% of the 7,000 to 8,000 cases it receives yearly. Who can appeal? So, hold on, what is this? A litigant who loses in federal court of appeals or the highest court state, they may file a petition or write a document asking the Supreme Court to review the case. the person who appeals is a district court decision. It's called the appellant, I guess, which is a petitioner, a litigant who files an administration appeal and originally processed the appeal. If the trial or administration agency committee is legal, if it's a mistake influenced the district court's ruling, the appellant must approve. And I have a little bit more information. Now, who is the name in a court case? It's the plaintiff. So the plaintiff is listed as the party that brings the suit. The name follows the V is the defendant. In case it is appealed, as this example, the name of the petitioner appealing is usually listed as the first, and then the response is the appealee. They listed as the second. Now going back to like who can appeal, like in a civil case is any party. The verdict in a civil matter, whether by the jury or the bench trial, the parties who settle for like a civil dispute can appeal. And then if it's like in a criminal case, the defendant can appeal a guilty conviction in a criminal proceeding by the government. They cannot if a person is not guilty. So either a party in a criminal case may appeal a sentence issued after guilty conviction by claiming that ruling violates the law and shows inaccurate application of the sentence's guideline or unfairly departs of the guidelines. And then in a bankruptcy case, there's several appeals in court have formed a panel of 3 bankruptcy judges, considered a request of like the bankruptcy courts. So the losing party, originally bankrupt's appeal, might then appeal to any courts. And then you have other types of appeals. The litigant is the person like is involved in the lawsuit who is not satisfied with the decision made by the federal administration agency, usually made to file a petition for review of the agency decisions by a court's appeal. And then a judicial review of the case involving the certain federal agency's program, for example, disputes of Social Security benefits may be obtained first in a district court rather than the courts of appeals. And that's pretty much my part. Now I'm going to pass it on to Drew.
All right, thank you, Amara. So hello everyone. My name is Andrew, and I did the executive branch part of my research. And what I found was so who is the executive branch? And I found out that Joe Biden is the head of the executive branch. And some deeper aspects into who he is his family, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. Well, that's his real name. That's Joe Biden's real name, and his father is Joe Biden Sr. His son, he had multiple sons. Had one son that passed away, Bo Biden. He has a living son right now, Hunter Biden. He has 2 daughters, Ashley and Naomi Biden. His co-workers are Kamala Harris, who's the vice president, Janet Yellen, who's the Secretary of Treasury, Merrick Garland, who's the Attorney General, Tom Vilsack, who's the Secretary of Agriculture, and Marty Walsh, who's the Secretary. I forgot his position, but he's a Secretary of something. I forgot. Marcia Fudge, who's the Secretary of House and Urban Development, Jennifer Granholm, who's the Secretary of Energy, and Dennis McDonald, who's the Secretary of Veteran Affairs. So when was the when aspect of the executive branch? So when was Joe Biden elected president? He was elected president. Well, he was head of the executive branch from 2020 to 2024. His birthday was November 20th, 1942. He started his position on January 20th, 2021. His last, well, this is the where part of the research. So his whereabouts was last seen on it was last seen November 12th through the 16th at the AESAN Summit and G20 Summit. And before that, he made an appearance at the UN Framework Convention on November 11th. And what is the executive branch? Is basically the acting president who is responsible for implementing and enforcing laws written by Congress and appoints the head of federal agencies, including the cabinet. The vice president is also a part of the executive branch, ready to assume the presidency should the need arise. And there's 15 executive departments, each led by an appointed member of the president's cabinet, carry out day-to-day administration of the federal government. And where is the head of the executive branch? The primary office of the executive branch is the White House in Washington, D.C., where the presidential inauguration is also held. U.S. Capitol, to be specific. Their governing power is across the U.S. territories. And why is there an executive branch? Someone needs to be appointed to make sure the laws are enforced and rules are followed by every head of agency. And how is the executive branch elected? So one must be a natural born citizen of the United States, at least 35 years old, and a resident of the country for at least 14 years. A president is elected indirectly by the people through the electoral college system to a 4-year term and is limited to 2 elected terms of office by the 22nd Amendment, which was created in 1951. And that's all I have.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. This is Chris, and I'm gonna bring to you present the legislative branch and the judicial branch. First, the federal government was established in 1789, and the legislative branch is Article 1 of the Constitution, which consists of the House of Representatives and the Senate. And they draft and propose laws, confirm or reject presidential nominations for the head of federal agencies, federal judges, and Supreme Court. And they have the authority to declare war. Also, the House of Representatives and the Senate resides at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. And I'll bring to you now the judicial branch, which is Article 3 of the Constitution, which explains and applies the laws. Under the judicial branch, you have Supreme Court justices, federal judges on the state level, which is appointed by the president, Supreme Court judges and federal judges on the state level. And the judicial branch established the structure and jurisdiction of the federal court system and create the position of the Attorney General. And you can go ahead with the executive branch there, Jamisha.
Thank you. So my name is Jamisha Jackson. We're team 2. We're doing what? The executive branch. My mind works a little differently, so y'all just bear with me. What I wanted to start out doing is defining what. So what is an interrogative pronoun used asking questions regarding either persons or things such as, well, what is this? What did you say? What poem is this? What child is lost? So of our research, the topic being government structures of the U.S., specifically the federal government, the 3 of them being the legislative, executive, and judicial, I am focusing on the executive branch. So I asked a lot of what questions and I'm giving answers. So what is the point of government in general? Most people in America, colonies, believe that everyone had a right to life, liberty, and property. These rights were called natural rights. Many of the founders believe people receive these rights from God. Others believe that people had them just as a natural right of being a person. John Locke was a famous English philosopher. He lived from 1632 to 1704, and he had written a book called The Two Treatises of Civil Government in 1690. And within that book, he wrote about natural rights. He said that the main purpose of government should be to protect the people's natural rights. He also said that the kings should not have absolute power, that is, power without limits, and they should not be able to deprive the people of their natural rights. Now, although people agree on certain natural rights, they worried about how those rights could be protected. Locke and others thought about what life would be like in situations where there was no government and no laws. They called this situation a state of nature, and they were afraid that in a state of nature, their rights would be taken away. Now, what is the executive branch? In 1789, the federal government was established via the U.S. Constitution, and my branch, executive branch, was under Article 2. So the executive branch is responsible for enforcing the laws passed by the legislative branch. The executive branch consists of the president, vice president, presidential cabinet, along with several other federal agencies and committees. Now, in addition to signing bills into law or rejecting or vetoing them, the president also has the power to influence current laws by way of executive orders and proclamations. The executive branch is also in charge of maintaining relations with foreign nations. What is the president's roles and responsibility? The president of the United States is both the head of the state and the head of the government of the United States of America, and also the commander-in-chief of armed forces. And he's elected within a 4-year term via the Electoral College. The official holder leads the executive branch of the federal government and is the commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces. Since the office was established in 1789, 45 men have served in 46 presidencies, and the first president, they say, was George Washington. The president is responsible for executive and enforcement of laws created by Congress. There are 15 executive departments, each led and appointed by a member of the president's cabinet, and they carry out the day-to-day administrations of the federal government. The president has the power to sign legislation into law, veto bills, enact by Congress, although Congress may override or veto with a 2/3 vote of both houses. The executive branch conducts diplomacy with other nations, and the president has the power to negotiate and sign treaties with the state ratifies. The president can issue executive orders with direct executive offices and clarify further existing laws. The president also has power to extend pardons and clemencies for federal crimes. Here's another question. What does the vice president do? The primary responsibility for Vice President of the United States is to be ready at any moment's notice to assume the presidency if the president is unable to perform his or her duties. This can be because of the president's death, resignation, temporary incapacitation, or if the vice president and a majority of the cabinets judge that the president is no longer able to discharge the duties of the presidency. I'm going to explain the what of the executive office for the president. So each day, the president of the United States is faced with scores of decisions, each with important consequences for America's future. To provide the president with the support that he or she needs to govern effectively, the executive office of the president, which was created in 1939 by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. The EOP has the responsibility of tasks ranging from communicating the president's message to the American people to promoting trade interests abroad. What is the president's cabinet? The cabinet is an advisory board made up of the head of 15 executive departments, appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. The members of the cabinet are often the president's closest confidants. The role of the presidential cabinet is to advise the president on any topic that comes up that he must delegate to the appropriate member of cabinet. In addition to the vice president, the presidential cabinet consists of 15 different departments with an executive branch. I have a list of them. So the first one is the Department of Agriculture. The Department of Commerce is the government agency tasked with creating the conditions for economic growth and opportunity. The United States Secretary of Commerce oversees $8.9 billion budget and more than 41,000 employees. The Department of Defense. The mission of the Department of the Defense, DoD, is to provide the military forces needed to deter war and to protect the security of our country. The department's headquarters is at the Pentagon. The DoD is the largest government agency with more than 1.4 million men and women on active duty, more than 700,000 civilian personnel, and 1.1 million citizens who serve in the National Guard and Reserve Forces. Together, the military and civilian arms of DoD protect national interests through warfighting, providing humanitarian aid, and performing peacekeeping and disaster relief services. The Department of Education mission is to promote student learning and preparation for college, careers, citizenship, and global economy by fostering educational excellence and ensuring equal access to educational opportunity. The U.S. Secretary of Education oversees the department's 4,200 employees and $68.6 billion budget. The Department of Energy's mission is to advance the national economics and energy security of the United States. The United States Secretary of Energy oversees a budget of approximately $23 billion and more than 100,000 federal and contract employees. The Department of Health and Human Services is the United States government principal agency for protecting the health of all Americans and providing essential human services, especially for those who are least able to help themselves, such as Medicare, Medicaid, Food and Drug Administration, Center for Disease Control. The Secretary of Health and Human Services oversees a budget of approximately $700 billion and 65,000 employees. The Department of Homeland Security protects the American people from a wide range of foreign domestic threats. It's the third largest cabinet department with more than 250,000 people, and it deploys $58 billion in annual budgets across more than 20 components. The Department of Housing and Urban Development is the federal agency responsible for national policies and programming that address Americans' housing need, improve and develop the nation's communities, enforce, fair housing laws. The Secretary of Housing and Urban Development oversees more than 9,000 employees with a budget of approximately $40 billion. The Department of Interior. The Department of Interior is the nation's principal conservation agency. Its mission is to protect Americans' natural resources, offer recreational opportunities, conduct scientific research, conserve and protect fish and wildlife, and honor the U.S. governmental responsibilities to the American Indians, Alaskan Natives, and to the island communities. The Secretary of Interior oversees about 70,000 employees and 200,000 volunteers on a budget of about $16 billion. The Department of Justice mission is to enforce the law and defend the interests of the United States according to the law, to ensure public safety against threats of foreign and domestic, to provide federal leadership in preventing and controlling crime, and to seek punishment for the guilty of unlawful behavior, to enforce fair and impartial administration of justice for all Americans. With a budget of about $25 billion, the DOJ is the world's largest law office and central agency for enforcement of federal laws. The Department of Labor oversees federal programs for ensuring strong American workforce, overseeing 15,000 employees with a budget of $12 billion. The Department of State plays the lead role in developing and implementing the president's foreign policy. The Secretary of State serves as the president's top foreign policy advisor, overseeing 30,000 employees with a budget of $35 billion. The Department of Transportation is to ensure fast, safe, efficient accessibility and convenient transportation system that meets our vital nation's interests and enhances the quality of life of the American people. The U.S. Secretary of Treasury oversees about 55,000 employees with a budget of $70 billion. The Department of Treasury is responsible for promoting inclusive economic prosperity for all Americans. with a budget of $13 billion and a staff of more than 100,000 employees. And lastly, the Department of Veteran Affairs is responsible for administering benefit programs for veterans and their families, also the survivors. It has a budget of $90 billion and a staff of about 235 employees. And that completes the executive branch.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep. Good to hear you now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it was my microphone wasn't working. Yeah, I had some notes I wanted to add, just kind of general notes about governments and government structure.
Okay, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Okay, so when it comes to the federal government, only the federal government can regulate foreign commerce as well as commerce between states. They can declare war and they can set taxes, spending, and other national policies. And the Constitution establishes the government on federalism, which is the sharing of power between national and state and local governments. And of course, the federal government separated into three branches: executive, judicial, and legislative. And I kind of just broke down governmental structure just as like a broad term. So, definition of governmental structure is the activities, methods, and principles that govern a country or other political unit. And to govern, the definition of govern from Webster is to exercise continuous sovereign authority over exercise continuous sovereign authority to control and direct the making and administration of policy. In other words, to control, to manipulate, to influence, and to serve as a precedent for deciding principles. And different forms of government structure, not talking about just the US. One of them is a monarchy, and that's a system based upon the rule of a single person, and that is through succession, which is like bloodlines and families. So that's like the king and queen. Only their family members can take reign of the throne. And then there's a dictatorship, which is also just a person or a small group which has absolute power without limitations. And they take power by a coup, or just taking over, I guess. And there's also a oligarchy, which is just a small elite group who exercise power for corrupt and selfish purposes. So that would be like, wealthy elites controlling things, monopolies. And then the last one, which would be a democracy, also called a constitutional government, is defined by a constitution, which is like a legal set of norms and principles, laws, to base everything off of. And that controls the exercise of political power. And the officials are elected, through a public election. So the people are supposed to decide who represent them. And let's see, different levels of government throughout the world is national, regional and state, and then city and local. The tasks of government are self-preservation, which is just to ensure the survival of the system, nation, state, and city. And also to supervise and resolve conflicts, which is to mediate and provide solution for conflicts affecting the nation, state, or city. And then we have the regulation of the economy, which is the wages, import, export, trading, taxes, all that. And they're supposed to protect political and social rights by representing citizens and protecting the human rights and the right to a fair participation in their system. And they're supposed to address social issues affecting the populace. And they also oversee, the transport of goods and services, and just, certain goods and services like public education, the postal service, fire, police department, disaster preparation, and then resources like electric, water, and gas. And yeah, that's about it for just the broad definition of governmental structure.
Screen shares and everything, y'all.
Okay, guys. Good evening, everyone. This is Team 3. We were tasked with the question of when. When was the United States government structure founded? Our team consists of Chuck Cooper, Dave Jamison, Corey Davis, and myself, Candace Long. And we decided to provide the timeline of the United States federal history, which ultimately answers the questions of when the United States structure was founded. The Pilgrim Code of Law, established November 15, 1636, was the first covenant with many basic elements of the Constitution. It built upon earlier covenants, including charters and the Mayflower Compact, and was based on popular sovereignty and annual elections. It created an institutional framework with a general court that elected a governor and 7 assistants as a council. It specified the powers of officials, required oaths, and provided trial by jury. The 1636 code outlined the rights, duties, and powers of free men, the general court, the governor, and the court of assistants, and an array of additional officers involved in administration of the colony. The Declaration of Independence, established July 4th, 1776. On June 10th, 1776, the Continental Congress appointed a committee of John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Robert Livingston, and Roger Sherman to draft a document expressing the intent of the 13 colonies to declare independence as states. The committee presented a revised version to the Continental Congress on July 2nd, and the Congress redrafted it before adopting the final version on July 4th, 1776. At this time, John Hanson was elected the president of the Continental Congress. He is known as the first president and also documented to be a man of color. The Articles of Confederation, established from 1777 to 1781. On June 11, 1776, the Second Continental Congress established a committee of representatives from each colony to establish a Confederate government for the United States. The Articles of Confederation established a weak government, lacking military and unable to levy taxes, and tasked with facilitating a firm league of friendship between the states rather than a centralized federal government. The Articles of Confederation was adopted on November 15, 1777, but it took until March 1st, 1781 to secure the unanimous ratification of the states. From September 26, 1778, the treasury system was reorganized. It created an auditor, office of comptroller, office of treasurer, and 2 chambers of accounts. The Constitution of the United States, established September 17, 1787, established the 3 branches that we see today, the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. And then the Federal Judiciary Act, founded September 24, 1789, established the structure and jurisdiction of the federal courts. In 1789, George Washington, known as the first president of the United States, served from 1789 to 1797 at this time. And for us, there were a lot of honorary laws and acts that took place over the span of almost 400 years. However, we felt that this 6 established the structure that we see today. And so we based our presentation on that. And we provided our resources here. We have a lot more that was uploaded to Collab, but we provide our presentation was based on this time frame here. And then that was pretty much it, assuming that we had like 5 to 10 minutes to do our presentation. Anybody have any questions?
Okay, so we'll go to team 4. So team 4 is Chris Jean, Ed, and June. You are team 4, which is Y.
Yeah. Hey, what's up, everyone? It's Chris. I'm gonna present today. You hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right, so I'm gonna start off. So we are team Y. Our initial question was, why do we have federal government structures? But before we want to get it, I want to go a little deeper. So we went to, why did the government come about? And another question we also have were, are they serve the people? So it's just part of our why. So brief backstory in American history, we separated from Great Britain. Settlers who came were a large group of people, and people came about, need direction, figuring out where to separate and go back under the mother country. So the government, first of all, as people discovered that protection was easier if they stayed together in groups. They all agreed that one or some of the group should have more power than others. They appointed a group of individuals to make rules for the collective. In their attempts to balance order with liberty, the founders identified several reasons for creating a federalist government to avoid tyranny. Thomas Jefferson once said that the purpose of government was to protect the inalienable right that man received from their creator. So we had we looked up the etymology of federal government, and then part of it was a French word, fédéral, from Latin American stem, fauder, faudus, meaning the covenant, league, treaty, alliance, pertaining to a league or treaty derived from an agreement or covenant between parties, especially between nations. Now fast forward to the present. Our first discussion of this the federal government structures are set up to provide rules, protection, and directions for the people, to form a perfect union, establish justice and ensure domestic tranquility, provide for common defense, promote the general welfare and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our prosperity, to ordain and establish the Constitution for the United States of America. It also can be said to ensure government's fair distribution of power for decision-making and to prevent the usurpation, wrongful seizure of power by representatives of another branch, which consists of three branches: executive, judicial, and legislative. The executive branch, executive power in the United States, belongs to the president, as well as the vice president, the cabinet, and federal agencies that report to the president. Their responsibility is to enforce laws passed by Congress. The judicial branch is represented by the courts, various levels of the Supreme, federal, criminal, civil, and appeal courts, in which members are appointed by the president and approved by the Senate. It serves to interpret laws, protect citizens and the state, and in some cases eliminate contradictions with the law of Constitution. We also have the legislative branch. It's represented by a congressman elected by the people, the body that represents the legislative and bicameral Congress, consisting of the Senate and the House of Representatives. Together, they carry out the duties of considering and passing laws, ratifying international treaties, and declaring war and peace. These branches' authorities create a system in which power is evenly distributed, and each branch can influence and oppose for the other. This approach makes it almost impossible to usurp, seize power so that fair decisions can be made. Therefore, the U.S. government structure demonstrates that it is built on a check and balance system, which provides an equal distribution of power. Congress has the power to adopt laws, approve heads of government and judges. However, the president has the initiative to appoint candidates, the right to veto, as well as the duty to represent the state government. Congress determines some of the features of the work of courts and can remove judges. However, the Supreme Court can declare some of the Congress decisions, laws, unconstitutional, even though the system creates difficulties in the work of the government due to complex procedures and processes of agreement. As long as representatives of all branches of the government serve the good and the state system is effective. Some other things I found that were interesting when I was looking at the etymology of the word government. One that I found was the relationship between a word and its dependence. Thought that was interesting. And then something else I found was government means to control the mind. It was like gouverner, which is Latin, and then montis, which means mind. So gouverner meaning to control, and montis meaning mind. I know in French Creole, gouverner, gouverne, does mean to control, and then montal is like a Creole word which also means mind. So I know Latin is similar to French and Creole, so I just thought that was interesting how that related in itself. And that's all we got. Team Y.
Okay, good job there. Team Y, which is team 4. All right. So the root word, the etymology, did I hear you say correctly that it's to control the mind?
So yeah, so gouverneur, and that is gouverneur, and Creole is gouverne. It means to control. Montis, mens, which is Latin, is the minds. I know the French and the Creole meaning because I grew up French and Creole, so I thought that was interesting how it related to the Latin meaning.
Okay, good insight there. So this is absolutely wonderful because there are, even though I'm sure many of us do know some of what has been even spoke of thus far, but there are those tidbits here and there that either we didn't think of or just didn't know, and so on and so forth. So good job, you all. Is there any questions for team 4, which is Wise? From team Y. Okay, so next here we have team 5. Team 5 is the Hows. And again, that's How, and that's Cassandra, Christopher B, Maricela, and Schuyler.
Hello, everyone. This is Maricela here. I'll just go ahead and start it off. So basically, me and Cassandra are going to present our information that we found. And I kind of did the same thing as Jamisha. I just presented some how questions and answered them. So let's see here. I started with how was the federal government formed / conceptualized? So essentially in the 1780s, the original government system known as the Articles of Confederation was not working according to the controllers during that time, which led to the 3 separate branches of power that we have been talking about all night. So that's how that came to be. And then some other question I came up with was, how has the federal government been involved in education? And essentially it started, well, it might have started before that, but from what I found was with the Supreme Court's 1954 ruling in Brown versus the Board of Education. This gave the executive branch a legal precedent for enforcing equal access to education, where the federal government continues to administer other programs to this day. Let's see here. And so continuing on with the federal government in school, it didn't issue any educational policy until the 1960s. And when Johnson was, when we were in the Johnson administration, he called it the Great Society Program. And let's see, the National Science Foundation published a report studying which educational techniques were effective. And from then on, federal involvement in education has increased. And another how question I asked was, how has the structure evolved, the federal government structure? And essentially, so I mean, it's continuing to evolve to this day, but interpretations of particular clauses in the Constitution have led to an increase in federal power over time. When the Constitution was ratified, there were still debates between Federalists and the Democratic Republicans in Congress about how much power the federal government should have. The necessary and proper clauses gives the federal government power to create laws they deem necessary and proper, quote unquote, while the Commerce Clause gives the federal government power over interstate commerce. And how that is broken down essentially is described by enumerated versus implied powers. So enumerated powers are those things that the Constitution explicitly says Congress can do, such as Article 1, levy taxes, regulate commerce with other nations, declare war, among other things. And then, so then there's the implied powers part, which is, this is a quote, from this necessary and proper clause, Congress argued that it had implied powers to do the things necessary in order to achieve its enumerated powers. And so from that comes the Fourth Amendment, basically came from that. So how did the Fourth Amendment give the federal government more power over the states? Well, in 1819, in McCullough versus Maryland, let's see, the Supreme Court case guaranteed the supremacy of federal laws over state laws and declared that Congress has implied powers not listed in the Constitution in order to fulfill their enumerated powers. So that's a bit of a loophole of how the federal government, I guess, can extend their powers. And let's see here. How has it been influenced, i.e. By powers that be, corporations, corruption, etc. So let's see here. The main thing I got from that was, let's see. Of course, let's see, there's connections between wealth and political power and the enduring struggle to sever or at least weaken those connections. So money, like financial interests or power elites usually try to dominate the government. So that's one way of how it's been influenced. And so it started during the Gilded Age, which was back in 1877. And there was a lot of corruption, whereas presidents were essentially giving their friends and people that were donating money to them positions of power. And then, my other question on that was, how do the people, citizens view the federal government system as far as corruption goes? Results from a Pew Research study as recent as 2020, about 2/3 of adults believe that politicians are corrupt and the system needs a major reform. Let's see here. And then my second to last question was, how has the federal government been influenced by social media / technology? Based on a review of more than 50 social science studies and interviews with more than 40 academics, policy experts, agree that platforms like Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter likely are not the root cause of political polarization, but they do exacerbate it. So they did a study in 2020 where people stayed off of Facebook for a month, and essentially it significantly reduced polarization of views on policy issues. But I mean, they still had their party identity, but it just definitely made a difference as to the level of anger that they displayed. So that was how it's influenced by social media and technology, which was interesting because, Tony, you have mentioned this before, but governments are increasingly purchasing sophisticated technology to monitor their citizens' behavior on social media. social media surveillance refers to the collection of processing of personal data pulled from digital communication platforms. Advances in AI have opened up new possibilities for automated mass surveillance. Let's see here, at least 40 of the 65 countries covered by this report have instituted advanced social media monitoring programs. Their use by governments is accelerating in 15 of those countries. So essentially, the federal government is definitely now evolving more towards using the technology side of things to, obviously we can see social media and things of that nature, how I just described, people are getting upset more easily nowadays. And the last question is, how much is the federal government in debt? And the last thing I found was 31.27 trillion is how much we are in debt. And yeah, that's it.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. This is Cassandra, and I'm going to finish out my portion of what we found. Okay, so I started out with giving the definition of the word how, and it means in what manner and by what means. And it's used to ask about the condition of or the quality of something. And someone mentioned earlier, I think it was team 3 mentioned about, or team 4 about etymology. And when I looked up the word etymology of how, it stated that how was in combination of asking the question of why, and that it was a Germanic word from the 1800s, or actually 1865. But the Native American reading of how is given the annotation of approval. So I just wanted to add that little bit in there. Okay, so the American government has 3 branches, and we all know that. The executive branch is focused on daily administration of the country, and it's headed by the president. The legislative branch makes the laws and encompassed by the U.S. Congress. The judicial branch interprets the law, interprets and opposes the law under the Supreme Court. So we've got these 3 branches, and each one has power over the others to make sure that no one group can ever be too powerful. So think of it as our political government as a political version of rock, paper, scissors. President vetoes Congress. Congress undermines Supreme Court. The Supreme Court overrides the president, and the Congress. Paper covers the rock. Rock breaks scissors. Scissors cut paper. This delicate balance of power is written within the U.S. Constitution, but it actually changed over time. None of the 3 branches look the same as in 1887, as they do now. But as long as they have changed together, no branch became more powerful than the other, and the game continues. The American government has the 3 branches and is focused on the daily administration of the country. Let's see, hold on one second. Okay, and I found that information, if anybody's interested on how the U.S. government evolved over time, is on steady.com, and I'll add that into the chat. And this article was written on November 6th of 2017. All right, so let's begin with a simple but virtually important proposition. Government in America was never supposed to engage in the multitude of activities that it does today. And Marcella just mentioned those activities. When the United States gained its independence more than 200 years ago, the founding fathers envisioned a national government with explicit and restricted responsibilities. These responsibilities pertain mainly to protecting the security of the nation and ensuring domestic tranquility, which meant preserving public safety, especially in the realm of domestic affairs. The foundings foresaw very limited government interference in the daily lives of its citizens. And we all know that that is not the case today. The founders did not create a Department of Commerce, a Department of Education, or a Department of Housing and Urban Development. This was an oversight. They simply never imagined that the national government would take an active role in such activities. The minimal government involvement in the domestic economy would be founded and delivered at the state and local levels. Even that involvement was to be restricted by Congress's authority over interstate commerce, an authority granted to Congress by the founders for the purpose of preventing the state government from interfering in commerce. Recognizing the propensity of governments to grow, the people added the Bill of Rights to the Constitution as an additional layer of protection for the rights of individuals against the state. The Bill of Rights was to ensure that government would never grow so large that it could trample on individual and economic liberties of American citizens. These liberties are eroding. The United States have been gradually transformed from a nation with almost no government presence into the marketplace to one in which the government is now the predominant actor in the domestic economy of today. Considering these, there are now more Americans employed by government than by the entire manufacturing sector in America. In the past 25 years, the federal government has spent $2.5 trillion on welfare and aid to cities. This is enough money to purchase all the assets of the Fortune 500 countries, plus all of the farmland in the United States. In 1987, the US farmers received more money in government subsidies than they did in selling their crops in the marketplace. In short, farmers now produce for the government and not for US consumers. In 3 states today, California, Maine, and New York, almost half all the middle income family wages are captured by government through income, payroll property, and sales tax and other levies. Why is the American public not rising up in protest? The answer seems to be that the growth of government has been sufficiently gradual over the past 50 to 100 years that most Americans today probably believe that this is why government in America ought to be acted and has always acted. So in my findings of doing this research and how the government has changed, I found 2 other documents. And one of the documents is called, well, both of them are called The Hidden Tyranny. And I'll add that in the chat as well. But it would do everybody some good to look into, why we have the government that we have now and who's controlling it. So the title is The Hidden Tyranny, and there's 2. One is by Benjamin Harrison Friedman. And you can also look up The Dynamic Silence. And the other one is also called The Hidden Tyranny, but this one is dealing with Harold Rosenthal. Two very, very good documents. And I can read a quick little excerpt from out of that. Hold on one quick second. Thought I had it already up for everyone. Bear with me one moment. Okay, here we go. So there was one particular part in here where it mentioned that there has not been, and this is an interview by Benjamin Friedman, that there has not been a U.S. President elected since 1933, that they've all been basically infiltrated. So I don't want to put my opinion on any of this. I just prefer if you guys could pull up the document yourself and read it. And it's very, very, very enlightening. So if anyone has any other questions, feel free to ask.
Good job, Cassandra. Could you put that link in the chat there? All right. So any questions for Team 5? Any questions for Team 5? who are the hows.
Okay, so I'll go first. Is that bad? That echo bad, guys?
It's gone now.
Okay. So I just did a quick Google search and I put in like the keywords like other people have done, like where is federal government. And to my surprise, I found that federal government is everywhere in large and small countries, everywhere. And it's in everything. And there was even an article that talked about the need to assemble a world federal government, which it kind of sounds like we already have one.
Mr. President and Mr. Speaker and members of the United States Congress, I come to this House of the People to speak to you and all Americans, certain that we stand at a defining hour. Halfway around the world, we are engaged in a great struggle in the skies and on the seas and sands. We know why we're there. We are Americans, part of something larger than ourselves. For 2 centuries, we've done the hard work of freedom, and tonight we lead the world in facing down a threat to decency and humanity. What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind: peace and security, freedom, and the rule of law. Such is a world worthy of our struggle and worthy of our children's future.
But it's not really labeled that way, at least what we see. And then another interesting point is the government has interest, as we probably know, in private innovation. One company that I tend to follow is Palantir, and I'm not quite sure what all they do, but from listening to the business folks, they have their hand in some things coming down the road. But anyway, so what else? And the federal government is in big data. It finances a lot of the big data that we need, such as what Palantir pushes and has. And I think Palantir came from the government. But anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, I can go next. Yeah, so I kind of said this is similar to some of the other people. I took the question where and try to answer that. So my first bullet point is where the federal government meets. Congress consists of 2 legislative bodies, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The House meet at the U.S. Capitol building in Washington District of Columbia. The address is Southeast, so Washington, D.C. 20004. It was initially built in 1800. The Capitol building stands predominantly atop the famously named Capitol Hill on the eastern edge of the National Mall. There are 100 senators and 435 representatives in Congress. Both the Senate and House of Representatives meet in separate large chambers on the second floor of the Capitol building. The House chamber is located in the South Wing, while the Senate chamber is in the North Wing. Congressional leaders like the Speaker of the House and leaders in the political parties have offices in the Capitol building. The Capitol building also displays an impressive collection of art related to American congressional history. And then the vice president also serves as the president of the U.S. Senate, where he or she casts a deciding vote in case of a tie. My next bulletin point is where the power resides. So the executive branch is controlled by the president, whose office is in the White House in Washington, D.C. The president is the head of the executive branch of government, which also includes the vice president, cabinet members, and government departments. The main function of the executive branch is to carry out the duties assigned to it in the Constitution and carry out the laws and policies enacted by Congress. The president is also acts as the head of state and the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. The president of the United States has the power to create some laws, such as the executive orders. However, they are subject to review by the judicial branch of government, which has the power to declare them unconstitutional. Under Article 2 of the Constitution, the president is responsible for the execution and enforcement of laws created by Congress. My third bulletin point is where they act on laws. So the judicial branch is in charge of deciding the meaning of laws, how to apply them in real situations, and whether a law breaks the rules of the Constitution. The Constitution is the highest order of our nation. The U.S. Supreme Court, the highest court in the United States, is part of the judicial branch. The Supreme Court is made up of 9 judges, where are called justices, who are nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate. The justices hear cases that have made their way up through the ranks of the court system. The main task of the Supreme Court is to decide cases that may differ from the U.S. Constitution. Once the Supreme Court makes a decision in a case, it can only be changed by a later Supreme Court decision or by changing or amending the Constitution. This is very important power that can affect the lives of many people. And my last 2 bullet points is where they get their money. The primary source of revenue for the U.S. government in 2022 is individual income tax. Revenue collected by the U.S. government is used to fund a variety of goods, programs, and services to support the American public and pay interest incurred from borrowing. And then finally, where the money goes. The federal government spending pays for everything from Social Security, Medicare, to military equipment, highway maintenance, building construction, research, and education. The spending can be broken down into 2 primary categories: mandatory and discretionary. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie and Will. Good evening, everyone. So my bulletin points for where. The United States Federal Republic is located primarily in North America, and it's composed of 50 states. Washington, the District of Columbia, is a federal city within a district, which most of the federal government is based, as well as 5 major self-governing territories and several island possessions. The United States comprises 50 states, 9 of the 13 colonies that were already part of the United States at the time. The present Constitution took effect in 1789, four that ratified the Constitution after its commencement, plus 37 that had been admitted since by Congress as authorized under Article 4, Section 3 of the Constitution. An administrative or political subdivision of a state is a county, while Louisiana and Alaska have equal county subdivisions called parishes and boroughs. Connecticut, Rhode Island, and some parts of Alaska and Massachusetts, having little or no power, existing only as geographic distinctions. Specific governmental powers of counties vary between states. 20 states further divide their counties into civil townships. Municipal entities also vary from state to state and typically subordinate to the government of a county or civil township. And those are my points. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Good job, you all. And that was Team 6, where. So do we have any questions for Team 6? All right, everyone. That was the first part of Let Us Learn Together, which dealt with government structure. So we have 2 more parts to go. and they'll be uploaded soon on YouTube. I hope you enjoyed. If there's any comments or questions, please leave them in the comments below. We do check the comments for a few hours after a video is uploaded. All right. Talk soon. Take care.